Hello my dear friends, you're in the MilitarySummary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of January of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. The Russian sources are saying that the Ukrainians are suffering significant losses, and when summarizing everything that was reported and stated by the Russians during the previous 24 hours, we can come to the conclusion that according to them, most likely the Ukrainians are about to be collapsed completely in this area, and like something tells me that maybe in 5-10 days the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area with the purpose to save as much as possible and as many as possible servicemen. But this is according to pro-Russian sources. As for the situation on the ground, the situation and the picture is a little bit different. So let's discuss in details. According to information we have, according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the direction of Orlovka, Novaya Sorochina, Staraya Sorochina, Viktorovka, and Malaya Loknya. The Russians managed to take under control several tree lines and to short the distance between their positions and the villages themselves. Furthermore, according to different sources, the Russians managed to take the Ukrainian Armed Forces group in Malaya Loknya near Sudzha in the Kursk region into operational encirclement. The Ukrainians is in the cauldron is up to 1,000 soldiers. So 1,000 servicemen were encircled by the Russians somewhere here. As for now, we can't check this information, but these are the statements that were made by different pro-Russian resources during the previous 24 hours. Furthermore, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under control the East Forest Belt and to shorten the distance between them, the Russians and the village of Nikolaevka itself. And according to different mappers, pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the village of Alexandria was captured completely. Yesterday, the information about the village of Alexandria was reported and confirmed by other pro-Ukrainian sources. So as you can see, the Russians are advancing. They're not moving so fast as maybe somebody was expected, but anyway, the Russians are moving. The question is the price the Russians are paying for these attacks and for this offensive. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the settlement of Ruskaya Konopelka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Today, the Ukrainian sources of the 95th Air Mobile Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine published the video of how they were repelling and attacking the Russian assault troopers and stormtroopers on the territory of the village of Ruskaya Konopelka. In this video, we can see a group of Russian soldiers that were moving along the village, and then the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking them. The video is very long. There are lots of episodes in this video. One of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point at the beginning of the video. Another episode took place on the territory of this forest. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. This is the situation on the ground by the end of the 9th of January, and this is the situation on the ground by the end of the 10th of January. So as you can see, according to this video, the Russians secured the village of Ruskaya Konopelka completely, and most likely the Russians entered the northern part of the settlement of Kositsa. So this is the next target for the Russians, and after that the Russians will continue their offensive operation in the direction of Cherkasskaya Porechnya. As for the southern direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything from this area. Different pro-Russian sources reported that the Ukrainians tried to counterattack the Russian positions in this area for several times, but those attacks were repelled by the Russians. Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. As for now, we are not changing the map in this area. We are waiting for additional updates. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the northern part of the settlement of Dvorichna. Basically, the Russians crossed the river of Nizhny Dvorichna and established a foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Oskol. This is very important progress, very important advance. If this information is correct and if this information is true, then most likely during the next 5-10 days the entire settlement would be captured and secured by the Russians, and then the Ukrainians will start suffering real problems. As for now, the Ukrainians are just trying to maneuver, and the main purpose of the Ukrainians to win some time before something, maybe before redeployment of additional forces or something like this. But the problem is, as soon as the Russians are able to take the village of Dvorichna under complete control, then most likely we are going to see the flower of Dvorichna, and the Russians will be able to move further deep inside of the Ukrainian territories. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the central Kupiansk direction. The Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operations. During the previous 24 hours, they were trying to counter-attack and to slow down the Russians on the line between the villages of Glushkovka and Kolesnikovka. As for the Russians, according to information we have, the Russians were advancing along the railways in the direction of the railway station Glushkovka. At least this information was provided us by different pro-Russian resources. If you ask my opinion, currently it's very difficult to understand who is telling the truth, because both sides are telling us that they're advancing in this area, and both sides are changing this map, this part of the front line in each favor. As for now, we will keep the map as is until we receive some geolocations that can confirm both information of the Ukrainian side and of the Russian side. Now let's move further. As for the central Kupiansk direction, the Russians are currently regrouping while they're trying to repel Ukrainian attacks from the north. The southern direction is in regroup, let's say, phase. The Russians are trying to prepare forces, units before further advancing in the direction of Boguslavka and Novoplatonovka. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the northwest of the village of Makeyevka. This information was provided us by pro-Ukrainian, by pro-Russian sources. And as for the village of Kolodezi, the report that the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian positions and to almost enter the northeastern outskirts of Kolodezi today was confirmed by neutral mappers. As for now, we are going to keep these territories as a contested area until we get additional geolocations and videos that can confirm this. As for the Sivers direction, today the Russians were mainly focused on Ukrainian positions to the southwest of the village of Bilogorovka. I'll remind you that several days ago the Russians launched one of the biggest offensive operations in the direction of the elevation in this area by the name of Bilogora, and most likely as a result of those attacks the Russians managed to take Bilogora under complete control. Most likely the Russians managed to repel Ukrainian attacks that took place after, and now the Russians, while the Ukrainians are regrouping, decided to expand their positions and to attack the Ukrainian forces that located on the settlement of Bilogorovka from behind. So we expect that in the very near future the Russians will try to attack in this direction with the purpose to take these forests under complete control and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from their positions along the river of Seversky Donetsk and the village of Bilogorovka itself. As for the Chasiv Yar direction, there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement. Basically, the Ukrainians during the previous 48 hours made hundreds of attempts to unblock forces that were caught in cauldron by the Russians on the territory of this forest in the micro district of Novy and on the territory of this industrial zone. I'll remind you that according to information we have, yesterday or the day before yesterday, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to encircle the Ukrainian forces that are located in this part. They were completely blocked by the Russians. Then, according to information we have, the Russians demanded and suggested the Ukrainians to surrender. Otherwise, the Russians would begin clearing operation, and most likely everything in this area would be destroyed. According to information we have, as for the beginning of the 10th of January, the Ukrainians refused the Russian proposal. They decided to hold their positions because during the previous 48 hours, the Ukrainians made lots of attempts to counterattack with the purpose to unblock, but according to information we have, most of those attacks were repelled by the Russians. And due to the fact that Ukrainians refused the proposal, the Russians began clearing operation, and most likely during the next 48-72 hours, this micro district and the forest itself would be cleared by the Russians, or the Ukrainians would suffer critical losses and then surrender. As for the northern direction, the Ukrainians, as you can see, also made lots of attempts to unblock the Ukrainian positions on the territory of the industrial zone. The main clashes were taking place in Novopivnishny micro district. The Russians also published lots of videos of how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces that were arriving in this area. Once again, this is another region where the Ukrainians suffered significant losses without any possibilities and any chances to unblock the Ukrainians on the territory of the industrial zone and the Chasiv Yar citadel. If all these things that today was published both by the Russians and the Ukrainians is correct and real, then after the Russians are able to defeat the Ukrainians and to clear this territory completely. I see no barriers for the Russians to move further, to advance further in the southwestern direction, and there are very high chances that as a result of fast lightning attacks, the Russians can enter the city of Konstantinovka itself from the west, and this is going to be complete disaster for the armored force of Ukraine in this direction. As for the city of Toretsk, today the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russian units on the territory of the northwestern part of the city. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor. We see that the Russians have already finished the battle for the city. Most likely we just haven't received geolocations from this part of Toretsk, and most likely this part of Toretsk was already captured by the Russians. We're just waiting when somebody will publish this. I believe this information will be published within the next 5-6 days, right before the inauguration of Donald Trump, and the Russians will publish the video with the Russian flag above this mine, maybe even on the 20th of January. Who knows what the Russians are planning to do. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to cross the river of Krivoy Toretsk and to answer the village of by the name of Novospaskaya. If you remember, during the previous several days we've been discussing a lot that now their main Russian target is the Kliman-Byk water reservoir. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, this is going to be the beginning of another cauldron for the Ukrainians that are currently located in the area along the N20 road. So we are talking about this part, and this might be another cauldron for the Ukrainians where they will suffer significant losses, and that's it. Furthermore, as for the village of Vozdvizhenka and the situation around this territory, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians managed to introduce additional forces in this area that managed to stabilize the situation at least for 1 or 2 days. Let's see how the situation is going to be developed in the next days, but as for now, the Ukrainians managed to stabilize everything. Indeed, the Russians several days ago managed to cut physically N32 road, but after that we see no changes on the ground. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. The situation in this area is very critical for the Ukrainians. According to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the territory of the settlement of Pishane. Few more blocks were captured by the Russians. One street was secured, and the Russians got a bit closer to the settlement of Zverova. Furthermore, according to the video that was published by the Ukrainian side as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to secure completely the village of Salona. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainian FPV drone, Ukrainians operators of FPV drones managed to discover the positions of the armored force of Russian Federation, and then they attacked these territories with FPV drones. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map completely in Russian favor. This territory considered as a contested area yesterday. Now we have no doubts that the village was captured by the Russians. Pro-Ukrainian sources tell us that the entire village was secured. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the direction of the settlement of Kotlina, and as a result of fast lightning and unexpected attack, the Russians managed to cut physically T0406 road. We are talking about the road that Ukrainians used to use to supply and support their forces on the territory of Kotlina and further in the direction of Dachna. According to pro-Russian sources, this road was cut by the Russians today, and now the Russians are going to move further, and everything is ready to begin offensive operation in the direction of the village of Kotlina itself. If the Russians are able to take this territory, and I expect that the Russians will try to complete this offensive operation also before the inauguration of Donald Trump, because this might be a very powerful media victory in the entire, when talking about the battle of the city of Pokrovsk. It's going to be like the first headliners on every single media that the supply lines to Pokrovsk was cut and that the Pokrovsk was already caught in cauldron or operational encirclement. As we can see, the Russians established complete FPV drone control further in the northwestern direction, and very likely the Russians have some ideas and plans to move further in this area as well. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kukurakhove direction. According to information we have, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the village of Dachna, but as for the end of the 10th of January, the Russians still haven't started any offensive operation in this area, just a lot of artillery strikes. We are waiting when this offensive is going to start, probably this week, maybe at the beginning of the next week, but most likely before the Trump's inauguration inauguration. I believe that before the Trump's inaugurations, the Russians will try to make another, let's say, a day of Russian flags. There are going to be maybe tens or dozens of flags raised along the entire line of combat contact from Sudzha to Kukurakhove. A lot of flags that shows that the Russians have the initiative in their hands and that there are no way and no chances for the Western countries to break the situation in their favor. As for the Velika Novoselovka direction, according to information we have, the Russians are planning to cross the river of Mokry Yale and to move in the direction of Shevchenka. This maneuver that the Russians are planning to carry out within the next several days will allow the Russians to improve their positions and to create a few more cauldrons in this area. As I understand, the Russians most likely don't have plans to attack Velika Novoselovka itself. As for now, they will try to exhaust the Ukrainians and they will try to improve their positions and to worsen the Ukrainians' positions as much as possible. The situation completely plays in Russian favor, so there is no need to be in a hurry. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours attacked the city of Donetsk with HIMARS missiles of Western production, and in this video we can see how during the daylight, during the working hours when people were on the streets, the Ukrainians began bombing and attacking the center of the city of Donetsk with HIMARS missiles. As a result of this attack, by the end of the evening, it is known that there were 3 people or 4 people injured. There were no reports about casualties among people. Most likely people were on their works and basically they were secured and protected by buildings. But these are the consequences of this attack. As you can see, lots of vehicles were damaged and destroyed. Most likely the Russians will answer to this attack and something big is going to happen during the next several days. As for now, the Russians are trying to concentrate and accumulate as many as possible missiles, and before the Trump's inauguration we should expect another massive missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.